indicator for what was previously round 2, now taking place in the main hall. The quarterfinal between the team Tigers and Malaysia Chicken Biryani. First of all, congratulations to both the teams on reaching thus far. Before we further formally move on with the debate, I would like that my panelists introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Dylan, your panelist for this round. Just refer the panel as a whole. All the best of luck.
Thank you, Dylan. And Paul? Paul, are you here?
Yep.
Cool then.
Hi everyone. Yeah, I'm one of your panelists. Congratulations on reaching this part. Good luck.
All right. Just a couple of housekeeping rules. Of course, keep yourselves muted during the duration of the debate. Until of course, you are the speaker, or the POI preference has been communicated otherwise. Speaking of which, at the start of your speech, each speaker is requested to state their preferred gender pronouns and the preferred method of taking POIs, be it verbally or via text. All right. Without further ado, on the motion that this House supports Just Stop Oil, may we please have Proposition 1 here.
Okay. Hold on, give me a few seconds to organize all of my notes.
Yes, you can take your time. And meanwhile, it would be great if both the teams can text their speaking orders in the chat. Thank you, Proposition. If Opposition could also... Oh, thank you. All right, then, let's have Proposition 1. Here.
Okay. Yeah, can I get a confirmation that I'm both visible and audible?
Yes, you're both visible and audible.
Okay. Gender pronouns she, her, POIs verbally, please, because I won't be checking the chat. Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. On top of my speech, let me crystallize the state of the world that we live in right now. Just take a look at COP28 happening right now in Dubai, where all major climate change activists and institutions gathered to talk about climate change. But turns out UAE as a host literally is planning to use this conference to talk about oil deals. How hypocritical it is, and why we really need to have a bold movement, just like Just Stop Oil, that is more effective. We're going to actually have more effective changes changes and progress at the end of the day. Our path to victory is clear, panels. We say that all other alternatives have failed, and the big leaders of large multinational agreements are the perpetrators that sustain an even bigger problem in the environment by normalizing the use of things like extractive resources, i.e. oil, coal, etc., and having the guts to say that it's going to be okay for the environment at the end of the day. With that, then 3 crucial points were set up on proposition to crystallize this debate, right? Firstly, let's clearly characterize what the supporting Just Stop Oil actually look like. I think there's several things to note under this. Firstly, note that there's going to be really clear social media engagement where you actually express and support on social media platforms by sharing Just Stop Oil's messages, for example, or their goals and actions, i.e. you participate or share online that like with whatever aligns with Just Stop Oil's objectives. This means that you're actually spreading a good degree of awareness into society where you actually will be sharing information about the environmental impacts of things like, for example, fossil fuels and the need for renewable energy resources, for example. But then secondly, I think this also looks like actively participating in their peaceful protests or like other events organized by them to demonstrate some sort of like collective action. But then thirdly, lastly, note that you're more likely to be able to discuss the environmental issues and the objectives of that type of movement within the community members to actually foster a deeper understanding and awareness. That means that you're actually encouraging a more open and respectful conversation about these types of environmental concerns within the community itself. But then secondly, under framing, I just want to clearly note 2 important things, right? Firstly, this movement is non-violent, which means that in this movement, whoever is a part of it, they want to show that they're not afraid of the extremely well-off and connected individuals. That's why they literally go to like F1 races, they block highways, etc. We see that this is a way to negotiate right now, especially in the highly heated situation where different viewpoints are actually contrasting. But then secondly, note that most importantly, under our side of the house, there's going to be a more collective action from society that understands the urgency, why they actually need to support Just Stop Oil, and why is that going to be the most effective way. So this means that there's going to be a consensus and an incentive for individuals to actually thrive for change at the end of the day. Done with the setup then, let me move on to my 2 substantive arguments inside my speech. First argument, why are the tactics that Just Stop Oil uses necessary? Second argument, how is this going to create more effective reforms at the end of the day? First argument then, why are the tactics that Just Stop Oil uses necessary? Let's give a clear context. 2 important things to note under this.
Go on.
Notice the actual urgency that we face in the current status quo, because currently there's actually a large push for global leaders to try and normalize and justify the continuous use of oil. Even now in global conferences like COP28, leaders are trying to normalize the use of extractive energy resources. Note that these are the people we're fighting. They're so powerful and rich, so the only way to actually help them and fight them at the end of the day is to actually have these really controversial things to show you actually aren't afraid of them and you're willing to make ends meet by showcasing those types of efforts. But then secondly, the fact that currently a lot of these decisions being made by extremely powerful people just don't get any sort of media coverage. That is to say that because these extremely powerful people are often the same individuals who fund the media, it's very unlikely for people to have awareness and create some sort of effective action towards what they're actually doing, because most likely these agreements are done in private. But yeah, before moving on, I'll take the POI.
Why would someone who has no relatability to you and consider you a nuisance be someone who negotiates with you and represents you and supports you?
I don't think that that's what we're actually talking about here, but then let's actually just engage clearly. That is something that I'll be engaging on in my arguments. I'll clearly flag when I get there. What are the parameters of an effective social justice movement, right? Let's just clearly characterize what that looks like. I think firstly, know that you have to have like nonviolent approaches and peaceful tactics that is going to get you the chance to actually do some sort of things like garner more support and generally are more effective towards the society itself. Because note that the most important thing to note under this movement is the fact that you're not actually giving into any of those violent measures, and you don't have the risk that will alienate you and any other potential allies to harm the movement's credibility as a whole, right? But then secondly, you need to have effective public awareness. We need that this is actually something that you get, especially in our side of the house, for example, through things like social media and things like that. But then thirdly, I also want to note that it's important to be able to adapt to things like your strategies and responses to changing circumstances, or like something that is actually essential in the movement itself. So let's give a clear analysis then. Why is this the only alternative? I think there's 2 important things to note under this. Firstly, Note that other alternatives have failed panels. This has been shown from the list of examples and list of agreements on an international scale that aims to solve and create some sort of change for the environment that are not actually effective at the end of the day. Look at COP26, the Kyoto Protocol, like Paris Agreement. All three major climate change conferences have not yet even given the solution to the environment degradation that we are in right now. But then secondly, this also looks like how regulations itself do not actually work in the current status quo. For example, like huge corporations who hold an immense amount of political power and therefore are able to lobby the government to make sure that like these climate change policies do not actually get passed. Exactly like how the world's major oil companies like BP or Shell donated to countless political campaigns to ensure that carbon tax will not be passed and can continue to actually do some sort of direct push against these climate change policies to tackle global warming. We have to be bold here and quote unquote radical, because if you want it to change, you really need to stop licensing gas, coal, and oil projects, which is actually what is happening. No, I'll not take that POI. But then second argument, how is this actually going to create more effective reforms? I think there's several structural reasonings under this, right? First of all, Just Stop Oil is the most well-known and popular movement in British by a long mile. Panels out of all the environmental movements there, Just Stop Oil is the only movement that everyone have heard of, everyone have watched clips and videos on. The platform and media attention that Just Stop Oil has is unrivaled. And when they make these bold actions, like sitting on the racetrack of the F1 race, every news channel is going to go there and cover it because it is just something unique and different. Just compare these actions with the usual marches and protests down the streets and how much attention that they actually got. When Just Stop Oil does something, yes, people might hate it, but at the end of the day, it gets media attention. Everything that they have done, especially since it's controversial, has generated so much awareness and discourse on social media. So, for example, Just Stop Oil throwing tomato soup on paintings has led to the creation of literally thousands of videos all over social media like TikTok, YouTube, or Instagram that talks about these actions. This is an important case that you need to count judge, because in a debate about social justice movements, you need to point out how you actually garner attention. Nowadays, no one wants to sit down and watch an hour-long march down the street with people yelling the same catchphrase again and again. Why is that the case? Simply because it's just boring, it's repetitive, and everyone has done that before. If you actually catch the eyes of the people and gather their attention, you do something new, and that is exactly what Just Stop Oil is actually doing. What will be the impacts of their media presence? I think exactly. Firstly, most importantly, increase attention and discourse. The media is notorious for handpicking the most radical stories available. And the Just Stop Oil movements clearly fall under this category. This means that even at the worst case scenario, where they're sitting in the Silverstone circuit in the middle of a race, they're able to get mass media coverage to the extent that F1 themselves are able to publish an article regarding this. For all those reasons, we're so proud to propose.
Thank you, Proposition 1, for that fine speech. To open the case from the opposition bench, may we please hear Opposition 1.
Okay. Verbal POIs. Proposition tries to fight fuel by lighting up fire. But if there's one thing the history of the environmental movement have taught us, is that you cannot fight fire with fire. There's three things in case setup before I move on into responses. Firstly, what is the vote on proposition? Two things. One, you have to support Just Stop Oil and the media representation that comes with it. This probably means that oftentimes social media is controlled by rich billionaires which have investment and oil oligarchs that probably have a lot of money to lobby on these platforms. This means that it can essentially manipulate the way in which these movements are portrayed. This means that then the burden on proposition is to prove why their form of media representation was always going to be one that was accurate of the advocacy of the movement itself. Not just to prove why there will be media attention, but why it always translates to something better. But I also like to note that all of the things that they do under their side of the house then is all quite radical. This is like protests on highways, which obstructs oil refinement when people in the UK are facing the energy crisis. So this means that they have to prove why these things essentially relate to the people on the ground. But second, what is the vote in opposition then? We would like to stray away from radicalism and focus on the call to take action for climate change through social media and educating individuals. But we set small attainable goals for the public and push for small and attainable policies. Three, what is the burden then? Proposition needs to prove why Just Stop Oil is crucial to the environmental movement and why sensationalization will always translate into actual change. In fact, opposition just needs to prove why Just Stop Oil is counterproductive to all advocacy of the environmental movement. Then, a few responses here. Firstly, is that the entire first argument about how this is the only alternative doesn't work here, because they try to give you a lot of examples of international conventions that don't work, but they don't necessarily tell you what is the link between these international conventions and the lack of radicalism in the market, right? Because I would like to believe that the environmental protest in America is probably quite radical with what they're doing, like protests and actively calling out the government and through things like media sensationalization. But these things don't actually work, given that a lot of the oil projects are still being approved in America either ways. They never proved the link in the first argument. Then the second thing here about why you are unique and different. They needed to prove why all media attention is good attention under this, but they failed to do so given that there were no impacts in the argument then. Two arguments then in my speech. Firstly, on why Just Stop Oil is counterproductive to the advocacy of the environmental movement. The premise here is that people feel extremely disconnected to the actions of Just Stop Oil protesters for three reasons. Firstly, is that the problem here is that the average person thinks about the environmental movement like this is not exactly their responsibility, right? Because the things that you talk about, like oil refinement and things like F1 races, are not about them. It is essentially about the millionaires and the big corporations out there. So this is why you make them stray away from the movement under proposition. Three things. One, when you stop things like pride parades because the movement is funded by environmentally immoral companies that you claim, the individuals that suffer the most from this is the LGBTQ individuals who are trying to celebrate love. So this means that to them, this is not the environmental movement and their advocacy is not even the most proximate to them compared to their own communities to begin with. But two, when you protest on highways, when people are trying to get to work, when people are trying to get to places which immediately calls for their presence, this means that they have to spend their time dragging these protesters off the road and thinking them as leeches of society because now you're obstructing their daily lives for something that they don't think they're responsible for in the first place. But three, when you throw soup on famous paintings out there, you probably only antagonize the artistic community that doesn't care about the environmental movement as much as they care about the artistic expression of these paintings to begin with. Second, what is the impact here? Two things. Firstly, is that it is counterproductive to its own goal of gaining better public perception, because people don't understand why you're exactly doing these things other than believing that you are the people who are obstructing their daily lives for something that is not responsible of them. So this probably means that if they believe that you are a movement that doesn't relate to the problems that these individuals have, I can never come up with a policy that is holistic enough to care about the suffering of the individuals on the ground or the things that they genuinely care more in their lives. But this also means that this is harmful then, because every policy change is contingent on people believing in your advocacy and people willing out to listen for the advocacy of your movement then. Thirdly, what is the comparative then under our side of the house? I'll take you after this. Is that one, they have no social relatability under their side of the house. Our side is simple because two, at the very least, they're not going to turn these individuals, these civilians in society, into your enemies. It doesn't matter if they are not your allies at the moment. It matters that they don't go against you at this point in time where it's extremely volatile when we see things like policies in the US getting passed, literally turning Alaska into an oil refinery project. So these are all of the things that we're trying to fight for and not to make these individuals our enemies then. Before I move on, I'll take that point.
Media sensationalism doesn't solve everything automatically, yes, but the counterfactual that you have to actually defend means less discourse, which lessens the possibility of change because everything happens behind closed doors.
This is why discourse is bad under the ass of the house. I'll explain it in my second argument. It's because Just Stop Oil only further obstructs the movement's pathway to gaining policy change. The premise here is that Just Stop Oil aims to obstruct key pathways that threatens million-dollar industries, like companies that often funds the government's political campaign because of all of these things to begin with. So there's two problems here. Is that one, because of this and public dissatisfaction with the movement, governments are forced to take action against the protests to gain more support from the public. They are being obstructed in highways, and also the million-dollar companies that probably funds their entire political campaign to begin with. This means that it is impossible for states to support you because they have to spend thousands more bucks on the police forces that are needed to stop civil obstruction. This means that even if this does happen under the ass of the House, it doesn't get manifested at the end of the day because states are unwilling to take action because this would threaten their ability to continue their political campaign in the future. But two is that when you set unrealistic end goals like stopping gas projects or oil and coal, it probably means that you already antagonize the individuals who need it the most, which are probably the individuals who are seeking jobs in these million-dollar industries within your company. All of the foreign investment that come in and rely on these state infrastructures on oil. This looks like how Macron's attempt to increase taxes on fuel was never able to manifest because of how it was obstructing the key ways in which people are living and companies are functioning to begin with. The second thing on the impact here is that opposition gives more political leverage to structures that are inherently against you. This looks like the million-dollar companies that relies on oil infrastructure. They're more likely going to lobby for things that are uncharitable to you. This means that it's important here because the prerequisite to getting change is to getting support from the people like the state. Is that you don't give them ammunition against you when you have things like far right-wing populism within the EU as a whole, right? These are the very things that we should focus on, is to never turn them into your enemies, but it doesn't matter if they are not your allies. Proud to oppose.
Thank you, Opposition 1, for that fine speech. May we please have Proposition 2 from the Proposition Leaders.
All right. Go by he, him pronouns, and I'll take POIs verbally. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. If the problem on op is about media being controlled by the billionaires, that is a symmetric issue because everything, if you trace it back, is controlled by these billionaires. But note that our burden is not to say that supporting Just Stop Oil will magically stop all the oil projects altogether. We understand that that is an unrealistic goal, but all advocacy takes time. By supporting Just Stop Oil, that means that you agree with their ways, you agree with their methods and their approach, and you believe that it is critical for the advocacy of the larger environmental movement. So all of Op 1's major points about how media sensationalism doesn't work because we still have oil projects right now is ludicrous because this debate is about comparison, about climate change advocacy with Just Stop Oil or without. They haven't touched all of our structural analysis about how that first step that Just Stop Oil takes is really just to garner attention. Even if it isn't perfect, it is still good for the larger movement in the first place. 3 things that I'm going to do in this speech. First clash on awareness. Second, I'm going to talk about how does this affect the larger environmental movement. And thirdly, I'll bring to our new and final argument about how does this, why are we able to keep companies accountable on our side of the house. All right, first let's talk about awareness. And they tell you a lot about the notoriety that Just Stop Oil has in the status quo. But let's talk about awareness panels. If you want to create some sort of change, you cannot just frame a world where you literally don't do anything, and that is the alternative which they refuse to talk about, where Just Stop Oil doesn't exist and people aren't actually aware of these problems. This is why our arguments were very important, panels. Because of the fact that you have these movements doing things that are putting themselves out in the world, that are garnering attention on social media. You showcase that these movements are not afraid of the establishment. Because again, note that the biggest perpetrators in the current status quo of these oil deals and stuff like that are the major leaders of environmental agreements. So one, know how even years after the incident, there's still many articles or even reels regarding the topic of Just Stop Oil protests, such as the one where they poured soup all over the Van Gogh painting, which shows that since the audience is always going to yearn for news that is radical, then the media presence is also going to be long lasting, because this is the main difference between Just Stop Oil and other movements which they try to posit. Simply because Just Stop Oil is able to show that they don't have any fear regarding fighting against billionaires to justify the use of oil, unlike other movements. But second, through this mass media coverage, it is clear that whatever kind of attention that is being placed upon the Just Stop Oil movement will also bring attention towards their reason to fight in the first place. Because at the end of the day, both sides would have to concede that in the status quo, Just Stop Oil has been the only British oil regulating movement that has been able to gain this much attention and preserve that attention for that long. They don't give you any other alternatives as to why people are going to pay attention to this issue if Just Stop Oil doesn't exist in the first place. But before moving on, yes, we'll take that POI.
If the audience doesn't resonate with the actions of the movement, it loses virality and people move on with their daily lives. How exactly do you get change under your side?
All right, look, we get change on the basis of awareness. I'll explain why that's true in a moment. But you literally just conceded that audiences resonate because it is sensationalized, not necessarily because they agree with the specific methods that are being taken. So I think it is true that we still get attention on our side of the house. Now, the next claim here is that media attention will be bad because social media and news companies are led by powerful individuals who use it for their own incentives and for their own interests. Now, panels, notice how we literally conceded to this. We don't have a problem with the notoriety that Just Stop Oil has. Because A, successful advocacy is not based on goodwill towards your movement. It is based simply on awareness. Maybe it is true that you as a person in society, you feel some disdain towards Just Stop Oil because they made you late to work, because they violated a painting that you really liked. But the fact that now they have their attention means that they can also direct that notoriety and that disdain towards the very oil companies that continue their unsustainable practices in the first place. Which means that at the very least, we're able to direct some scrutiny towards the oil companies, which wouldn't have any scrutiny otherwise. But B, the fact is that we don't need the attention of media companies or social media in the first place, because the methods that Just Stop Oil uses means that Just Stop Oil reaches the general public directly. The whole idea of sitting on disrupting public infrastructure and sitting on public roads and stuff like that is exactly because that is the most effective form of advocacy, by which you don't have to go through the billionaires and all the systems that are trying to trying to silence you, because you reach the general public directly on their way to work, and you're able to advocate that way. That means that you get awareness under either side of the house, exactly because of the tactics that these people use. Second clash then on how does this affect the larger environmental movement, and they tell you that this creates backlash against the environmental movement, which is bad because then people suddenly go against their own interests and support oil companies. Let's just take a step back and analyze why this is not true. We can concede that the nature of Just Stop Oil is quite controversial, and they do spawn a lot of notoriety. But the unique thing to know is that this doesn't necessarily reflect badly towards the larger environmental movement, because support of the environmental movement is based on self-interest. The reason why the environmental movement is so popular right now is because individuals, they understand themselves that regardless of what these smaller movements and protesters do, it is in their interest to not die to climate change in the near future. So maybe it's true that Just Stop Oil seems to go against their interests currently, but that doesn't change the fact that the larger environmental movement is probably something that you support as a result of a lot of good coverage in the past, such as the school strike for climate change and stuff. So the end goal of stopping climate change is good for you, which means that you do not immediately stop supporting the environmental movement just because this one small style movement made you late to work that one time. This is why their impact of people being oppositional towards the environmental movement in the future does not work. Because if you really think about it, just because you don't like Just Stop Oil doesn't mean that you are hateful to the point that you would go against your own future interests and cause more problems for yourself by advocating for oil companies down the line. But second, their idea of backlash only works if Just Stop Oil is the only environmental movement where individuals are seen. And in those instances, I'll posit that this is still because of the general idea of awareness. Yeah, people don't like Just Stop Oil, but they don't like oil companies either, which means that at a point where attention is called towards like a specific action that oil companies are doing, it doesn't really matter whether people like your movement, because when they know an oil company is doing something bad, that is already a good manifestation of quote unquote bad awareness. Finally, our extension, why does Just Stop Oil a whole status UK and new private politics or other means of incentive that are intuitively quite pernicious. But second, the fact that even aside from oil companies, lots of companies also try to push for the normalization of oil as well. Literally, companies in almost every industry, aside from like renewable energy, fight as hard as they can to continue their use of extractive energy. Why does Just Stop Oil uniquely keep these companies accountable? One, because at a point where people start to call attention to and scrutinize Just Stop Oil, that also puts companies under pressure, because intuitively, people don't only look at and scrutinize the problems themselves that Just Stop Oil causes. Some of that actually goes to the companies because they are the root causes of these problems in the first place. We think that you're able to keep the greed of companies in check. You get more things like investigations into how oil companies get their licenses in the first place, and you're able to expose the offhand methods that they use. Because when people actually start to become critical of these energy companies, that is the point at which you get more people analyzing and exposing the offhand methods that they will continue to receive new oil licenses. For all those reasons, very proud to stand on side proposition.
Thank you, Proposition 2, for that fine speech. To continue the case from the opposition bench, may we please have opposition second speaker.
Okay, just checking if you can hear me loud and clear.
Yes, you're both visible and audible.
Thank you. I'll be taking POIs verbally. Starting speech in 3, 2, 1. In the month of July, thousands of F1 fans from all over the world came together at Silverstone, UK, hoping for a good race. But in the middle of the race at the first straight, as watchers hope for a competitive overtake by the cars, 5 Just Stop Oil protesters run up to the middle of the roads, not only putting their own lives in danger, but also the drivers and everyone else near the track. Be realistic here. As an F1 fan watching the race, are you going to go home to discuss with your friends on how that was so cool and that was so brave? Are you going to complain how the one event that you've been waiting for, not only for decades, maybe for years, but has also been delayed and your favorite drivers' lives got put in jeopardy? I think it is clear that when these Just Stop Oil's protesters are so radical to the fact that 100 army members from the UK had to come to a Silverstone to stop them from sitting on the tracks, or there are thousands of protesters being arrested because of their public nuisance, is the reason why on their side of the house, they are ruining not only the lives of the Just Stop Oil's protesters, but also everyone else on the ground, insofar as they also threaten the key industries that are critical to the economy and the social state of the UK. One clarification at the top of this speech. We think the proposition here was incredibly unstrategic with their side of the case, because they tell you that their only burden in this debate, and it seems like their only winning pathway, is that they have to prove attention, and that is enough to gain them any sort of change. They have to do more than that, and the speakers after this need to prove that that attention isn't necessarily good, and it would translate into legislative change on the ground, especially when we've given you multiple reasons on the side of opposition why that terrible and notorious attention they get through Just Stop Oil is only going to further ruin the environmental movement and their image towards society and also the legislative makers in the end of the day. This is because there is a logical gap between everything they've talked about and also scrutiny that they say will happen on the oil companies. Just because Just Stop Oil gets attention doesn't automatically mean that people shift towards hating oil companies straight away when we've given you a grocery list of information as to why these Just Stop Oil would get negative attention within the media, and because of that, there's more scrutiny on literal Just Stop Oil movement than the oil companies to begin with. They needed to prove why that notorious attention was good on their side of the house. 2 issues then. Firstly, on public discourse, and secondly, on how their advocacy is out of touch and only caters to the top 1 echelons of society. First issue on public discourse. Meaning the entire crux of a proposition's case is that more public discourse is better, and this is true because Just Stop Oil is bold. Their entire benefit so far is contingent on how people perceive the movement, and insofar as we prove that that perception is negative and people do not want to opt into the environmental movement because of the existence of Just Stop Oil, that is enough grounds to oppose this motion. A few things here. First, we would like to note that it's incredibly important to understand that the environmental movement existed before Just Stop Oil. That means discourse on the environment and the discourse against oil companies have existed before your alternative of the Just Stop Oil movement existing to begin with. That means if your only benefit on the side of proposition was that discourse is good, we can also symmetricize that by saying that discourse happened before your movement existed, and that's why yours case has no marginal impact in this round. But secondly, we gave you multiple reasons as to why the discourse surrounding Just Stop Oil is effective, because we tell you that why the negative attention that Just Stop Oils propagate within the environmental movement leads to maybe thousands of videos being like posted about them, but those thousands of videos are calling them out and making fun of their like ways and their approach advocacy within the environmental movement to begin with. So yes, we concede that you get a lot of attention, but all that attention was making fun of the environmental cause, and that was negative, because not only then do people not opt into your movement, but the right-wing populists within the UK, for example, can use that as ammunition to make fun of the environmental movement, to make fun of the liberal cause, trying to be better for your environment. And because of that, that negative sensationalization is going to be something that's worse for the movement as a whole. And therefore, not only do you hurt the environmental movement, and because of that, you ruin your own winning pathway. Thirdly, we think even if on the side of opposition, on proposition where you get more attention, we trade that off insofar as that attention is controversial. Because we gave you multiple reasons already within the first speaker why the pre-existing environmental awareness is at an all-time high without Just Stop Oil's exclusive contribution. For example, within the EU, in the context that we're talking about, they already are pushing for top-down change within environmental policies to ensure that people are opting into more environmental friendly ways of carrying on their lives, or the encouragement of electric cars, and to ensure that the industry is being like improved within the status quo. Therefore, on your side of the house, you not only ruin the movement as a whole, but you also obstruct all current ways that we have within the status quo that are pushing towards that positive change, because you target the key industries that hurt the country's economy and their social state. You hurt the UK's economy the moment in which you want to ruin their entire oil industry that they're greatly reliant upon. Then you have no capital whatsoever to opt into green energy, because all of that capital is wasted on trying to calm down the public after Just Stop Oil's advocacy. You heard the millions on the ground. The prerequisite we have here is that we protect the people first. We think lastly then, even if on their side of the house where they get some form of attention, this is bad, because if Just Stop Oil becomes the dominant movement within the UK, you take away spotlight from all other movements within the status quo that could be more peaceful, that could be more beneficial to society. Because insofar, in the previous speaker, they concede they do get bad notorious representation, and that movement is going to be the dominant one within the UK. You make Just Stop Oil's dominant within the industry, and that becomes the forefront of the environmental movement within the UK in and of itself. That means you overpower all other types of narrative that might be better for the society, that might be more peaceful, and might be more relatable. And that's why if the environmental movement and Just Stop Oil gets bad representation, as you can see yourselves, the entire environmental movement goes down with that, and that's why you lose on your side of the house. Before I move on to my extension though, I'll take a POI if there's any. Tree.
Yeah, if Just Stop Oil doesn't exist, what do you think are the alternatives for people being aware of all the crimes that oil companies commit?
No, we gave you multiple layers in the setup on how our content model is going to be one that strays away from radicalism that Just Stop Oil like propagates, right? You can protest, but you don't obstruct the key sectors like sitting on the highways or like sitting or ruining the key oil industries within the country. We think there are multiple more peaceful alternatives as compared to Just Stop Oil that you do that can also advocate for change. And that's why your side is not exclusive in the end of the day. Lastly, then on the extension, while Just Stop Oil advocacy is out of touch and only caters to the top 1 echelons of society, the framing here is that Just Stop Oil end goals on demanding the UK government to stop licensing licensing new oil, coal, and gas projects in the country are not only unfeasible to the normal person, but also utopic for the average nation. First layer here, winning Just Stop Oil pushes for unrealistic policy change the entire world cannot even reach right now. Because, for example, you cannot fully replace the most used industry that we've been relying on for decades, and that is oil and gas, insofar and as green energy is something that's hard to transition to overnight, right? For example, electric cars in itself are expensive. It can only be afforded by the most privileged individuals. Therefore, even if on their side of the house, their advocacy brings some form of change, that advocacy will only cater to the top 1% and not protecting the vulnerable. At the end of this, it is clear that the normal people on the ground won't relate to Just Stop Oil advocacy, and even if they succeed on the best case of the side of proposition, that advocacy does not protect the vulnerable, and that's why they have to lose on scale and also vulnerability. Why is this bad then? Two things. One, we say when the environmental movement is already starting to get buy-in, you obstruct the progress insofar as that structures in and of itself in governments see the Just Stop Oil movement as unrealistic. But secondly, because all their goals require long-term change, if you concede that you want to hurt more people on the ground, your only impact in this round is not like getting long-term change because that is symmetrical insofar as you have alternatives. Your only impact is hurting the people within the status quo, and that's why you hurt key industries and you ruin the state of the country for all those reasons opposed.
Thank you, Opposition 2, for that fine speech. To conclude the constructive part of the debate from the proposition bench, may we please have proposition's third speaker.
Okay, I prefer POIs verbally. Start my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think at this point in the debate, it is fair to say that opposition never really listened to our case from the first get-go, right? And this is why it has been exemplified, and why their second speaker tells you that advocacy is just based on perception, and that perception that you get isn't actually good. But there's no structural reasoning that they give you as to why all of our benefits are based on the perception of the movement. In fact, we have give you multiple reasons as to why this isn't based on perception, and that why awareness is inherently good. Almost all of our benefits were based on the idea that you don't need to actually look good in order to make these oil companies look bad. Their refusal to engage with all of our structural reasonings is what will make them lose in this debate. Now then, two important clashes in my speech. Firstly, on why Just Stop Oil is like the only solution we have left, and my second clash on whether the awareness generated by Just Stop Oil would actually further this movement or harm it, right? Now then, on to my first clash. What is their argument? They said that this court has existed like long before Just Stop Oil, and this is why it isn't necessary. Look, first of all, I just like to point out to you that the world today isn't fixed, and was like the mindset of most people maybe that oil and coal is bad. This sadly does not apply to the political leaders and these people who are in the positions to actually make a change. So for example, this would like Vladimir Putin, who's like expanding Russia's and oil gas exports, or how in Brazil, they're literally cutting down the Amazon rainforest just to open up more land to extract fossil fuels, or like how in Saudi Arabia, the royal family there has like literally worked together with the oil company to increase oil production. Panels, yes, awareness existed before Just Stop Oil, but the question is whether this is effective, and the answer is no, it didn't work in the past. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what the social movements actually march down the streets. It doesn't matter that most citizens want the conversion between non-renewable to renewable energy.
Point.
At the end of the day, what matters is that what these political leaders does, right? And whether or not these political leaders profit off this oil. I'll take the POI later. Because of this exactly then, we need Just Stop Oil, because they're the only movement in British that's actually like bold and willing to stand up to those people who are in these positions of power. So when Just Stop Oil like glue themselves to like famous paintings like the Van Gogh sunflowers, or like John Constable's The Hay Wain, they're making the statement that they're not afraid of the repercussions, and what they want is change. When Just Stop Oil disturb Formula One races, they're saying that the people should start to listen to them and pay attention to the environmental problem that exists. And when they actually just spray paint slogans like, for example, no new oil on important buildings and monuments, like for example the Bank of England, Just Stop Oil is making the statement that they're not afraid of the rich, they're not afraid of the wealthy, or the powerful. They're saying that they're here to make a change and that no one can stop them. So because of this unique ability for Just Stop Oil to actually generate discourse and awareness, Our side say it's okay if other movement gets less attention because these movements haven't worked in the past, and we have proven to you why this repetitive action, such as, for example, marches down the streets, doesn't actually work. The public have seen these marches so many times. They're bored of this. They're not gonna care. They're not gonna like sit through and watch an hour-long march. This doesn't actually personally connect with them, and this is what happened on their side of the house. Look, maybe the actions of Just Stop Oil is radical, but that this is something that you absolutely need, because the fact that you might not be able to advocate in other more peaceful way, but two things right here. Firstly, this is just literally unsubstantial because you cannot prove that people care about this issue as a result. Useful protests are just as good as no protests unless they can prove to you otherwise. And secondly, this doesn't change the fact that in the status quo, it is very evident that Just Stop Oil has been the only environmental advocacy group to actually be successful in actually governing attention of the public, right? And furthermore, just take a look at the past attempts to actually solve environmental problems and how they have actually failed. Like, for example, the Green Homes Grant schemes that like literally only use 10% of the funds they promised to use and was just like canceled and scrapped after 6 months. Or the fees that were like put on plastics back when you buy them at supermarkets, which failed again because at the end of the day, it was dropped again because they don't want the consumers to be dissatisfied, or like how the US just left the Paris Agreement. Look, time and time again, proposals have been made. They have been carried out, but they have also all failed and they have been ineffective. Now then, before I move on to my second clash, can I take that POI?
Yes, the world right now isn't perfect, but Just Stop Oil has never accelerated that change to begin with. Insofar as you cannot prove how they have retrospectively led to legislative change, and you can see you get bad media representation because of the disconnect, what are your grounds to support Just Stop Oil?
Look, exactly because the world today isn't fixed, because it isn't perfect. We need something to change, right? And that is why we say Just Stop Oil will bring this change. You have said that in the past, there's like other alternatives. You have said in the past that there's awareness. But because of this, and because you said that the world today isn't fixed, it just proves to you why the past solutions hasn't worked, why they're ineffective. And this just proves to you why we need change, why we need Just Stop Oil to actually bring this, right? Now then, onto my second clash on whether the awareness generated by Just Stop Oil actually furthers movement or harms it. What are the arguments? They said that firstly, people are going to turn and become enemies, and when like Just Stop Oil does something like, for example, throwing tomatoes soup on a painting or like disrupting the Formula One race, right? Now, first of all, I like to just point out that controversy is good, right? Like, for example, if you make something that is controversial, some people might agree with it, some people might not. But then at the end of the day, this will always generate to more awareness. Like, for example, let's just compare this to like these marches. News network might like cover marches down the street, but at the end of the day, that's it. Like, that's it. People watch the marches, they agree. It's like, yes, we should help the environment, we should stop this government, we should encourage the government to make more policies. That's it, right? Under our side, when this is actually controversial, what happens is the news covered this, right? And then what happens is that after this, the news covers this, there's going to be like YouTube videos, there's going to be TikTok videos, there's going to be so much videos that's generated by this. They're saying like, oh, what Just Stop Oil doing is good, what they're doing is bad. At the end of the day, discourse is always going to be more generated, and our side awareness is going to be more, right? Look, using the example of like an F1 race, this is just incredibly the worst case scenario. We would like maybe alienate like maybe 1 or like the 3,000 people in this stadium but then at the end of the day, even if we alienate like the 1 or 3,000 that actually watch this F1 race, we generate way more awareness, right? The benefits that this action has done is outweighs the harms by a long mile, right? I think that it is actually like highly ironic for opposition to just literally claim that all we care about is awareness when they themselves do not even know what the parameters is of a good social justice movement is in the first place. If they argue that awareness is going to be achievable, fine. But this does not take away the fact that their side is relying on the agreements between major leaders that actually perpetuate what is happening in the environment and contributing to the worst effects because you grant them licenses for all of these oil projects. It is not our burden to prove to you why we stop all of these projects, but this is the world that they would actually want to actually live in, right? Look, here's why the awareness generated by it's actually good, right? Look, let's just bring this back to the premise and the main point of our case from the get-go. We have told you clearly and give you a clear framing as to why this is actually important, but let's just reiterate, right? 2 things. Firstly, exactly because Just Stop Oil is against oil, they have the ability to just bring the interest and the goal there. They're the ones who have the ability to actually go against these major leaders who are perpetuating and sustaining projects like oil projects, and they are the ones who are actually granting this license, right? Look, you don't look, even in the worst case scenario, when the audience just completely hates Just Stop Oil, the movement is the beneficial, because at the end of the day, Just Stop Oil isn't only generating awareness, they're also a form of check and balance in the status quo. Just Stop Oil has conducted research on like the UK companies. They have brought awareness that these companies, such as like, for example, BP, only got their oil licenses because of bribery. Look, you don't have to be liked in order to be effective. When it comes to social movements, all you need to do is make the people aware and care about the issues you're talking about. So for example, even if I hated Just Stop Oil, but then I knew that they brought up the point that the UK companies were bribed to get their oil licenses, I would actually hate the government more than I hate Just Stop Oil. And because of all of these reasons, vote for side proposition.
Thank you, Proposition 3, for that fine speech. To conclude the constructive part of the case from the opposition bench, may we please hear Opposition 3.
Hi, am I audible? Just to confirm.
Yes, you're audible.
Okay, POIs in the chat, preferably after the 5th minute. If I don't answer, just means I've rejected it. Just a second. Okay, I'll be going in 3, 2, 1. Side propositions supported narrowing the ability to have realistic change, where they put the chance of progression into hands of those individuals who are constantly mocked and disregarded by society. That said, delegitimize one of the most important causes in the status quo we're so proud to oppose. I have 2 major observations in my speech. Firstly, about the proposition pathway to victory. It has 3 things here. A, it relies on the assumption that individuals who have no proximity with you and to the cause are suddenly individuals who help. The strategic comment here is that all of ops benefits is contingent on how people perceive the movement, but they never engage with the analysis that we gave you about what the optics of the average person actually is, that they have other ulterior goals that exist, that they have other urgent matters that they need to attend to. So if I have a kid who I need to send to school, I couldn't care about the environment because that's my main concern right now, that I have to get myself out of the poverty trap. That means I'm going to attend to that thing. There are other reasons for me to not care about it, and all of these things take a priority over the environmental problems that exist. They need to give us clear framing, but at this point it's too late for them. Secondly, that it relies on an extremely classist model, and where individuals who fulfill the end goals are ones who come from privileged backgrounds. If you read the info slide, it means that there's no new oil and gas like being introduced into the country, meaning that the individuals who are generally able to live comfortable lives are those who have access to green technology and really advanced versions of it, meaning that the average person is locked out from being able to systemically use this oil and gas if their side is able to fulfill the end burden on their side of the house. So the people who are able to live meaningful lives and who are able to live comfortable lives on their side of the house are the individuals who have an extremely like privileged background. I don't think they genuinely benefit the average person on the ground. They only benefit those who are able to have a change in lifestyle in the first place. But thirdly is that you take away attention from other movements. So insofar as Proposition wants Just Stop Oil to be the dominant movement, it means that all of the impacts we spread towards the cause also harm the other groups and the legitimacy of these other groups. So the aggregate change that we were capable of reduces across the board, where this dominant movement, which is Just Stop Oil, also changes the fact that other movements are delegitimized with them, meaning that the actual cause itself is delegitimized to some high extent. Secondly, the advocacy of the environmental movement gets diluted because of bad media representation. So this just generally means that on a net scale, all of the reasons for environmental change and all of these other problems which are associated with it are further going to be pushed down the drain or not given priority because of the reason that Just Stop Oil is becoming something that is such a nuisance to people, that antagonizes people to the point in which they just don't want to have a general sense of caring about the problem that they're trying to talk about. The second part about the retrospective sense of the Just Stop Oil movement and about have they genuinely contributed towards anything. Recognize the fact that all the controversy that they've caused never actually contributed towards anything monumental other than Instagram reels making fun of them and the fact that people just generally have a disregard for the entirety of the movement as a whole. They might have caused controversy and they might have stepped up to very powerful people, but it doesn't mean they had any change. But I would argue that it further regressed the faith that people had within the environmental movement because they're seen as something that's extremely radicalist in nature. What is the model on our side? We told you that we support anything that is outside of being radical in nature. It means that we can also have protests, but we don't do it to the extent in which it's radical in nature, where we don't go and block a highway that might be part of a F1 track and that might antagonize antagonize individuals. We support having awareness and education, which means that it's going to be more legitimate because people are likely to believe us more, and I'll bring that out in the framing later. But very importantly is that our model has had some sort of systemic change in the first place. In the EU, which is where this debate is taking place mainly, is that there's an all-time high about the awareness and the problems of environmental change. That's why electric car subsidies exist. That's why a lot of these new homes that are being built on sustainable and renewable energy, and the government takes active intervention in it. It's because the cause has legitimacy in all of the other like sub-movements that exist, and the government does have a genuine interest. But on their side of the house, they further regress from this ability. And if they want the dominant movement to be Just Stop Oil, they further impact organizations. I'll take you in a bit, and I said in the chat, rebuttals. How scrutinization of Just Stop Oil means that there's also backlash towards these oil giant companies. This is completely not true, because if people scrutinize, it's not like they're going to care about why they're protesting in the first place, because in their eyes, they fight for a cause that's extremely distant towards them. So they don't give any analysis why people should care in the first place. But even if people do, on their best case scenario, investigate why the oil companies do whatever they're talking about, it's due to other external factors, such as them being supporters of different environmental movements, or because they're proximate towards the harms that exist. To simplify, even on their best case, if it does occur, it's not born from the radical actions of Just Stop Oil, but rather due to other efficient subgroups that exist, or that they're proximate towards the problems that exist. They can't co-opt the benefits of this. Secondly, about how being a martyr and dying and fighting elites means that Just Stop Oil is able to truly enact change. First of all, they never actually engage with the analysis. We told you that if people consider you a nuisance, they delegitimize the cause in their mind, because technically they aren't able to rationalize why you do certain actions, meaning that there's no sort of relatability towards you. So this means, secondly, you standing up to individuals who are from elite echelons of society doesn't mean anything insofar as no one believes what you're trying to push towards them. But thirdly, even if they were to believe, the entire point of the debate is about how there's one extreme end goal for the average person. So for like the average person who's just relying on oil and coal, like who literally has to trade off their quality of life, why would they support someone who's threatening to trade it off for a cause that is not even proximate towards them? Because if you read in the info slide, they clearly mention about the fact that they want no new oil and coal to be there. So for the average person who is relying on this, why should they be the ones who are going to support you, even if you step up to the elites? They never give us any framing about why should someone who will want to trade the quality of life suddenly become someone who is going to be on their side of the house as well. On to the first question about how the ability for change to occur is significantly lower on their side, and why the end goal is extremely unrealistic. Firstly, about how there's a disconnect of individuals from the cause of the movement. We told you that individuals have other proximate issues that might impact them, such as being in the poverty trap or being proximate towards other issues, but this model further antagonizes these individuals away from potentially supporting the movement. We told you that the entire problem of this is that you're radicalized in the eyes of the public, meaning that they're likely to not listen to you, but rather listen to other alternative things. So they pivot towards media news sources who might be against you. They pivot towards big politicians and large oil barons, who are going to be people who are saying that this cause is something that's trying to delegitimize my company, or this is a group which is trying to delegitimize the state as a whole, meaning that they're not going to support you in the first place. But before I move on, I'll take the point. No points.
Look, even in the best case scenario where people are alienated because of Just Stop Oil, isn't Just Stop Oil still beneficial, as they've done research and point out oil companies that only got their license from bribery?
That's contingent on it actually happening. Insofar as you don't give analysis on why it actually occurs, you can't claim any of the benefits. But finally, moving on to about how individuals further regress from the chance of being able to understand the movement, we told you that the actions that these people do don't usually tie back to the end goal. So these people are not going to do the mental gymnastics that rationalizes the action of throwing soup on a painting that causes them to like basically not like the movement in the first place. You can't drag the average person in, even if you don't, because even if they don't understand, like even if they do understand why you support a cause, they won't necessarily understand how your group operates. So there's a distinct clarity that not clarity that exists. But finally, we told you about how the media portrays them in an extremely bad way, because they want to monetize the content by sensationalizing and ridiculing the group. So on our side of the house, on our side, their best case is that media will still be against us, but it also means that there's lesser societal backlash. This debate isn't about black and white. It exists on scales, meaning that we have lesser negative impact from media. But finally, we told you that government support and aid also occurs on our side of the house for the simple reason that the average person is going to be there and not going to be antagonized with us. So we're able to attract more critical mass. But finally, larger energy firms aren't going to be against us, because we're not literally threatening the entire profit margin. We're still able to go against them, but not to the point in which they literally shut down the entire movement. With that, so proud to oppose.
Thank you, opposition reply, for that fine speech. Opposition 3 for that fine speech. Opposition reply, the floor is yours.
It isn't a myth why Germany's rule on boilers and Macron's attempt to increase taxes on fuel all made people adverse to greenery, and why Biden approved the Willow Project. It is simple that even if policies about environmental change did get passed, insofar it was one that was radical and unattainable, people will never accept it in any way possible. There's two questions I would like to talk about in this speech. Firstly, on whether discourse and media attention always translates into a better cause, and second, in terms of the policy change that is able to be enacted by the state. Two things under discourse and media attention. One is that the problem with Proposition's case here is that they're fighting for a false comparative. The problem isn't that awareness doesn't exist without Just Stop Oil, but the long-term dominance of Just Stop Oil and its radicalism takes away proper media attention. We've proven to you in Andrea's and Manasvin's speech that when you sensationalize their actions, it is when you stray away from the actual advocacy, because you discuss more about how to ask the security to block protesters out from the next F1 race in order for you to enjoy it, or framing these famous paintings to prevent it from being destroyed by Just Stop Oil protesters. All of these things outweigh the meaningful discourse that you might potentially have on research. Because the average working class trying to get to work and see the highway being flooded by protesters doesn't care about the advocacy. They care about getting to work and not getting fired. So therefore, they will call the police and ask these people to be dragged out of the highways then. Therefore, we trade off media attention here. And P2 and P3 already concedes that environmental awareness is already at an all-time high. So therefore, they would never prove the tipping point as to why this form of media attention that could be bad, and they already conceded to the fact that people will hate these movements to begin with was essential at this point in time. But two, we tell that the policies that you essentially have then is quite counterproductive, because Proposition's pathway to this outcome falls here because they want to hold companies accountable. But you cannot do that if you don't have mass buy-in. So it does matter if people now hate you, because when you don't have mass buy-in, then you can never hold companies accountable. So making a statement here doesn't matter because people don't take your statement into account, because your statement doesn't get manifested at the end of the day. But the second thing here in terms of policy change here, I think that the logical gap in Proposition's outcome on getting actual change was ignored in this debate, right? Because why would political leaders in Russia and Saudi Arabia now suddenly care about the entire thing on not extracting more oil if Just Stop Oil exists? They never proved to you the logical link there. But I would like to note that making a statement is not important here, because even if it was true that you needed bravery for a cause, our argument explained why the policy change that they wanted was unrealistic. Because the state is funded by billionaires and big companies. They are the only powerful actors that are capable of enacting change and also powerful enough to destroy you as a whole because they manipulate the media. So this is why making a statement and making them your enemy is counterproductive to your cause. All of the policy change that you want under their side of the house is harmful to the economy and the lives of the people on the ground, insofar as you're trying to stop billion-dollar projects that probably will benefit the economy at the end of the day. So this was why when you turn states against you, it probably means that you, one, and don't have mass support, which you're already traded off, but two, their entire advocacy on how they want states to care about it, they want political leaders to talk about it, doesn't work. Because in the next election cycle, what they're going to promise individuals is that you'll put more funding into police forces to stop these people from obstructing civil obedience, not about actual environmental changes and environmental advocacies to begin with. Proud to oppose.
Thank you, opposition reply, for concluding the case on opposition bench. To conclude the debate as a whole, maybe please have the reply speaker from the proposition bench.
Okay, yeah. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panels, I think it's fair to conclude that opposition did not clearly listen to our case from first. It really doesn't make sense for them to say our comparative is unclear when whatever happens in their world is contingent on how agreements and how they allow these types of agreements like COP28, where all major climate change activists and institutions literally gather to talk about climate change, but turns out to be hosted by places like UAE, who literally is planning to use this conference to talk about oil deals in private. That is not saving the environment. You cannot allow that to go unchecked. Let's discuss the strategic mistakes, right? Know that opposition talked big about media being controlled by billionaires, which I think is never the burden to be debated upon in this debate. That's still symmetric at the end of the day, because everything, if you trace back to the root, is controlled by billionaires anyway. But anyway, our burden is not to say that supporting Just Stop Oil will just suddenly miraculously stop all these types of projects altogether, because that is unrealistic. We understand and concede that at the end of the day, obviously all types of advocacy will take time. But the thing that distinguishes why our case is unique is because when you actually support Just Stop Oil, you agree with their ways and their approach, and you believe that it is actually critical for the advocacy that will go under our set at the end of the day. What does this do to their case then? I think firstly, opposition once claimed on how media sensationalism, I just want to bring that back, but that doesn't work because we still have oil projects, and I think it's ridiculous because this debate is about comparison about climate change advocacy with Just Stop Oil or without, which we have already characterized since the get-go, right? But then opposition to statement that, advocacy is based on perception and the perception you get isn't good shows that they literally did not listen to our case, because we told you it doesn't matter that whatever awareness is happening, whether it's good or bad. And also note that I want to clearly point out how they don't actually provide you with any structural justification or why our gains are entirely dependent on how the movement is actually seen. Without then two clashes. First clash, the necessity to support Just Stop Oil. What did we tell you? We told you that Just Stop Oil is the only effective movement to garner media awareness, and that their radical actions is the only method to truly stop the licensing of things like oil and other projects, simply because it's the only way for people to listen to you. They told you then under their case that, discourse has existed before Just Stop Oil, but then also that movement should not be radical, and that's how their side is going to create change. I don't think that that's enough, because firstly, it's true that awareness was previously there before Just Stop Oil, but it wasn't the fact that it's there, it's not functional. That's why our path to victory matters here, because what matters is what these political leaders do and whether or not they profit from oil, whether or not those attempts and negotiations that go behind closed doors under the illusion that they're finding an effective change for climate change is going to be approved with a license or not. But then secondly, it doesn't matter that social movements march through the streets or that the majority of people favor switching from non-renewables to renewable energy sources. Look, note that their own side has pointed out that the status quo isn't fixed. So it's still broken. So by their own logic, doesn't this mean that the past actions to help the environments weren't effective, that they failed? Side opposition cannot win this debate by pointing out efforts to improve the environment and gave no analysis on why these efforts are impactful and better than Just Stop Oil. We've made it clear from the get-go, all other alternatives have failed. Just Stop Oil is our best solution. They're the only movement that's actually bold enough to go against and call out political leaders, and they're the only movement that makes bold actions that garner awareness. But let's talk about awareness under second clash. Which side actually gives you better progress? They told you that people will be alienated as they care about watching F1 races more than the environment. But then secondly, you need to be liked in order for awareness to be beneficial. I think it's important to note that social media awareness is something that you actually need to frame out clearly, and it's something that you need to clearly credit panels, because in a debate about social justice movements, this is something that you need to actually point out how you actually garner attention at the end of the day. I think successful advocacy is not actually based on goodwill and like that type of good image. It is simply based on awareness, because maybe it is true that you as a person in society feel some disdain towards Just Stop Oil because they made you late to work. But the fact that now they have your attention means that they can also direct that type of attention towards the very oil companies that continue their sustainable practices is something that will be fixed under our side of the house. You don't have to be liked in order to be effective. When it comes to social movements, all you need to do is make people aware and care about the issue you're talking about. For all those reasons, proud to propose.
Thank you, Proposition Reply, for concluding the debate as a whole. I thank both the teams for what was an excellent round of debate. You will shortly get to know of the decision. Meanwhile, I would request my panelists to move to, I think, breakout room 10. Yes, breakout room 10 is empty to do the deliberation and conferral for the decision. Thank you.
Thank you for the debate.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Good.
for the debate.